My son's teacher called and asked if we owned a shovel with a red handle. The question hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. I was standing in the kitchen making coffee when Mrs. Delacroix called, her voice tight with something I couldn't identify yet. Not anger, not concern, something colder. "I'm sorry, what?" I said, setting down the mug harder than I meant to. She repeated it slowly, each word deliberate. "Does your family own a shovel with a red handle?" My mind scrambled for context. "We have tools in the garage. Why are you asking about a shovel?" The pause stretched too long. "Mr. Brennan, I need you to come to the school right away. Don't bring your son, just you." She hung up before I could ask anything else. I stood there holding my phone, watching steam rise from the coffee I hadn't taken a single sip of yet. My wife Natalie was upstairs getting dressed for work, and our son Oliver was in his room playing video games before school started. Everything was normal 15 seconds ago. Now Mrs. Delacroix's voice echoed in my head with that strange, flat quality, and I knew normal had just ended without warning. I called up the stairs that I had to run to the school for something and would be back soon. Natalie yelled down asking if everything was okay, and I said yes, even though my stomach was already twisting itself into knots. The drive took 8 minutes through morning traffic that felt like it was deliberately slowing me down. Every red light lasted an eternity while I tried to figure out what a shovel could possibly have to do with third grade. Oliver was doing fine in school as far as I knew. His grades were good, no behavioral problems. He'd been going to Riverside Elementary for 2 years now, without a single issue that required me coming in for an emergency meeting. Mrs. Delacroix taught the class next door to his, so why was she calling about Oliver at all? I parked in the visitor lot and walked through the front entrance where the secretary buzzed me in without her usual cheerful greeting. She just pointed toward the principal's office with an expression that made my chest tighten. Principal Graham was waiting in his office with Mrs. Delacroix and another woman I didn't recognize who introduced herself as Detective Paulson from the county sheriff's department. The detective's presence turned my confusion into something sharper and more dangerous. I sat down in the chair they'd positioned facing all three of them, feeling like I'd walked into an interrogation I didn't know was happening. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for coming so quickly," Graham said, his hands folded on his desk. "We have a situation that requires your immediate attention and cooperation." Detective Paulson opened a folder and slid 3 photographs across the desk. They showed a section of the woods behind the school playground, and in each image, there was disturbed earth, fresh digging, and propped against a tree in 2 of the photos was a shovel with a bright red handle that I recognized immediately because I'd bought it at the hardware store last spring. My mouth went dry. "Where did you get these pictures?" Mrs. Delacroix answered, her voice still carrying that cold precision. "I take my class on nature walks every Friday afternoon. We go into the woods behind the school to study local ecosystems." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "This morning I decided to walk the trail before school started to check the path conditions. I found this site about 200 yards from the playground fence." Detective Paulson leaned forward. "Mr. Brennan, I need you to be very honest with me right now. Is this your shovel?" I looked at the photos again, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. "It looks like ours. We have one like that in our garage, but I don't understand what it's doing in the woods behind the school." The detective made a note. "When did you last see this shovel?" I tried to think back through the blur of routine days. "I used it maybe 3 weeks ago to transplant some bushes in our yard. It should be hanging in the garage with the rest of our tools." Graham cleared his throat. "Mr. Brennan, we need to ask you directly. Did you dig in those woods for any reason?" The question hit me like cold water. "What? No, I've never been in those woods. I drop Oliver off at school and pick him up. That's it." Detective Paulson's expression didn't change. "Has anyone else had access to your garage recently? Anyone who might have borrowed the shovel?" I shook my head, trying to make sense of this. "Our garage isn't locked. It's just a suburban neighborhood. People don't lock their garages during the day." The detective wrote something else down. "I need to be direct with you, Mr. Brennan. We're investigating a missing child case. 11-year-old Ashley Simmons was reported missing 3 days ago. She was last seen leaving this school." The room tilted sideways. Missing child, the disturbed earth, my shovel. The connections formed a picture so horrifying, my mind rejected it completely. "You think someone buried her there?" The words came out flat because my brain couldn't process the emotion behind them yet. "We're investigating all possibilities," Detective Paulson said carefully. "But yes, we brought in a cadaver dog this morning before school started. The dog alerted at that site." Mrs. Delacroix's face had gone pale. "We haven't excavated yet. We wanted to speak with you first since the shovel appears to be yours." I stood up so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I had nothing to do with this. I don't even know who Ashley Simmons is." Graham held up his hands. "No one is accusing you of anything yet, Mr. Brennan. But you need to understand how this looks. Your shovel at a potential grave site for a missing child who attended this school where your son is enrolled." My heart was hammering so hard, I could hear it in my ears. "I want a lawyer." Detective Paulson nodded like she'd been expecting that. "That's your right, but I'm going to need you to come down to the station to answer some questions officially." The next 3 hours passed in a nightmarish blur of fluorescent lights and small rooms with metal tables. I called Natalie from the police station and tried to explain what was happening, but the words sounded insane even as I said them. She left work immediately and met me there with a lawyer named David Cho, who specialized in criminal defense. David told me to answer questions honestly but briefly, to not volunteer extra information, and to stop talking immediately if he said so. Detective Paulson questioned me while her partner, a younger detective named Walsh, took notes. They asked about my schedule 3 days ago when Ashley disappeared. I'd been at work all day at the accounting firm where I'd worked for 6 years. I gave them my supervisor's contact information. They asked about my relationship with Oliver. Normal father and son, I told them. We played catch on weekends. I helped with homework. Nothing unusual. They asked if I knew Ashley Simmons or her family. I'd never heard the name before this morning. The question circled back to the shovel again and again. Who else had access? Could Oliver have taken it? Why would a shovel I owned end up at a crime scene? I answered the same things over and over, while David sat beside me watching everything carefully. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, Detective Paulson leaned back in her chair. Mr. Brennan, we're going to need to search your property, your house, your garage, your vehicles. David started to object, but I cut him off. Do it. Search everything. I have nothing to hide. Paulson pulled out a consent form. I appreciate your cooperation. We can do this with your voluntary consent right now, or we can spend several hours getting a warrant. Either way, we're searching your property today. I signed the form with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. David gave me a look that said I might be making a mistake, but I couldn't see any other choice. If I refused, it made me look guilty of something I didn't do. The police needed to see that my life was exactly what it appeared to be. Boring, normal, and completely disconnected from whatever happened to Ashley Simmons. Natalie was waiting outside the interrogation room when we finished. Her face was blotchy from crying, and she grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. They think you killed a child. The words came out as an accusation and a question at the same time. I didn't. I swear to God, Natalie, I had nothing to do with this. She searched my face for something. Maybe the truth, or maybe just reassurance that the man she married wasn't a monster. Then how did your shovel end up where they found it? That was the question that had no good answer. We drove home in separate cars, David following behind us, and found 3 police vehicles already parked on our street. Neighbors were standing on their lawns watching. Mrs. Chen from next door had her phone out, probably already texting the neighborhood group chat. Detective Paulson met us at the front door with another consent form about photographing and documenting everything they removed. I signed it and stepped aside while 6 officers filed into my house wearing gloves and carrying evidence bags. They started in the garage, photographing the empty hook where the shovel should have been hanging. The other tools were all there, neatly organized on the pegboard I'd installed last year. Everything in its place, except the one thing that mattered. One officer bagged some loose dirt from the garage floor. Another took samples from our other gardening tools for comparison. They moved through the house systematically, checking closets and drawers while Natalie sat on the couch with her arms wrapped around herself. Oliver was still at school, and I was grateful he didn't have to see this violation of our home. Detective Paulson went through our bedroom, our bathroom, our storage spaces. She pulled out my laptop and asked if I'd consent to a forensic examination of it. David advised against it, but again, I said yes. Let them look. Let them find nothing. That was the only way through this nightmare. They took my phone too, and Natalie's, and the family computer from the den. After 90 minutes, Detective Walsh came downstairs carrying an evidence bag. Inside was a pair of work boots I recognized as mine, the ones I wore for yard work. These were in your closet, Walsh said. We're taking them for analysis. The soles had dirt caked in the treads, normal dirt from normal yard work, but now it would be tested and compared and scrutinized. Everything about my ordinary life was being recontextualized as potential evidence. They finished around 3 in the afternoon, leaving with 7 evidence bags and a complete photo documentation of our home. Detective Paulson handed me a receipt for everything they'd taken. We'll be in touch, she said, and the neutrality in her voice was somehow worse than outright hostility. After they left, Natalie and I sat in the ransacked living room without speaking. The police had been careful but thorough, and our home felt violated, despite nothing being damaged. Finally, she said, "We need to go get Oliver from school." Her voice was hollow, like she was going through motions because that's what parents do even when their world is disintegrating. The school pickup line was worse than I'd imagined. Other parents stared at our car with undisguised suspicion. Some pulled their children closer when they saw us. The news had clearly spread that police had questioned me about Ashley Simmons. Oliver climbed into the back seat with his usual energy, talking about something that happened at lunch, completely oblivious to the stares and whispers surrounding us. Natalie didn't say anything during the drive home. She just gripped the steering wheel and stared straight ahead while I sat in the passenger seat feeling like a stranger in my own life. That night, after Oliver went to bed, we sat at the kitchen table and Natalie finally asked the question that had been building all day. "Did you do something?" The pain in her voice cut deeper than any accusation could have. "No." I looked directly at her. "I did not hurt that girl. I've never even seen her. I don't know how my shovel ended up in those woods, but I had nothing to do with it." She nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt creeping in around the edges of her belief in me. The next morning, David called with news from the sheriff's department. The cadaver dog's alert had been a false positive. They'd excavated the site where my shovel was found and discovered the remains of a large dog, not a human child. Ashley Simmons was still missing, but she hadn't been buried in the woods behind Riverside Elementary. Relief flooded through me until David continued. However, they're still investigating why your shovel was there and whether it has any connection to Ashley's disappearance. You're not cleared yet. The temporary reprieve felt hollow. Someone had taken my shovel and used it to bury a dead animal in woods behind my son's school. That wasn't random. That was deliberate. But why? I went to work that day because sitting at home would have driven me insane and immediately felt the shift in how colleagues treated me. Conversation stopped when I entered the break room. My supervisor called me into his office and asked if I needed time off to deal with personal matters. The unspoken message was clear. Maybe I should make myself scarce until this situation resolved. By Thursday, someone had posted my name online connecting me to Ashley's disappearance. The internet worked its terrible magic, turning suspicion into certainty without evidence. Reddit threads dissected my social media history. True crime enthusiasts on Twitter declared me guilty based on the fact that police had questioned me. Someone found our address and posted it with comments about protecting the neighborhood children. Natalie got a call from her sister saying she'd seen my name in a Facebook group dedicated to finding Ashley Simmons. The group had nearly 40,000 members, and a significant portion of them had decided I was responsible. Death threats arrived via email and direct messages. Someone spray-painted "child killer" on our garage door at 3 in the morning. I filed a police report, but the responding officer's expression made it clear he thought I probably deserved it. Oliver came home from school crying because kids were saying his dad murdered Ashley Simmons. Other parents had forbidden their children from playing with him. Natalie moved out on Friday, taking Oliver to stay with her mother. "I believe you," she said while packing their suitcases, "but I have to protect our son. This situation is destroying him." I stood in the doorway of Oliver's room watching her fold his clothes and felt my family disintegrating. I didn't do anything wrong. My voice cracked on the last word. She stopped packing and looked at me with exhausted eyes. "I know you didn't, but wrong doesn't matter right now. Perception matters, and everyone perceives you as guilty." They left that evening, and I sat alone in the house that felt cavernous and accusing. Every corner held evidence of the normal life I'd had 5 days ago. Oliver's drawings on the refrigerator, Natalie's book on the nightstand. All of it felt like artifacts from an extinct civilization. David called Saturday morning with the forensic results from my boots and the shovel. The dirt on my boots matched samples from our yard, not from the woods behind the school. The shovel had my fingerprints on it, which made sense since it was my tool, but it also had a partial print that didn't match anyone in the database. "That's good news," David said. "It means someone else handled the shovel after you did." But good news felt relative when my life was still in ruins. Ashley Simmons remained missing. The police had no other leads, and the internet had collectively decided I was guilty regardless of what evidence suggested. I drove past the school that afternoon and saw news vans parked along the street. Ashley's mother was giving an interview, her face ravaged by grief and fear. I wanted to roll down my window and scream that I had nothing to do with her daughter's disappearance. But what good would that do? The grieving mother needed someone to blame, and I was convenient. That night, someone threw a brick through my front window with a note tied to it that read, "We know what you did." I called the police again, and again they took a report without any real intention of investigating. On Monday morning, Mrs. Delacroix called my cell phone. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Brennan, I need to tell you something." Her voice had lost that cold precision and now carried something closer to fear. "I think I made a mistake calling you that morning." I sat up straighter on the couch where I'd been sleeping because I couldn't bring myself to use the bedroom. "What do you mean?" She took a shaky breath. "I found something else in the woods. I didn't tell the police yet because I wanted to talk to you first." My heart started racing. "What did you find?" There was a long pause filled with the sound of her breathing. "Another shovel, a blue one, hidden under some brush about 50 yards from where I found the red one. And there are more disturbed earth sites, at least 4 that I counted." The implications hit me like a freight train. "Someone is staging this." Mrs. Delacroix's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I think someone has been using the woods behind the school for something, and they're trying to frame you for it." I told her to call Detective Paulson immediately and report what she'd found. After we hung up, I sat in my destroyed living room, trying to process this development. Multiple burial sites, multiple shovels. This wasn't about Ashley Simmons or about me. This was something bigger and more disturbing. My phone rang again, this time David's number. "The police want to talk to you again. They found something at one of the news sites," Mrs. Delacroix reported. My stomach dropped. "What did they find?" David's voice was carefully controlled. "Personal items belonging to Ashley Simmons. A backpack with her name on it. They want to know if you have any knowledge of the other burial sites." I drove back to the police station feeling like I was trapped in a loop that kept getting worse. Detective Paulson put me in the same interrogation room, and this time, her demeanor had shifted from neutral to openly suspicious. "Mr. Brennan, we now have evidence that Ashley Simmons was in those woods. Her backpack was buried at one of the sites. How do you explain that?" I couldn't. That was the horrible truth. I had no explanation for any of this. "I've never been in those woods. I told you that." Paulson slid more photos across the table. These showed the blue shovel Mrs. Delacroix had found, and then additional photos of disturbed earth at multiple locations. We're excavating all of them. If we find Ashley Simmons's body at any of these sites, you're going to be arrested for murder. David put his hand on my arm, a warning to stop talking. But I was past caring about strategy. Why would I use my own shovel with my fingerprints on it if I was trying to hide a body? Why would I leave it there like a calling card? None of this makes any sense from the perspective of me being guilty. Paulson's expression didn't change. Criminals make mistakes, especially first-timers who panic. The interview lasted another hour before David finally insisted we were leaving. No charges had been filed yet, but Paulson made it clear I shouldn't leave town. That evening, David came to my house with another lawyer, a woman named Rebecca Torres, who specialized in criminal investigations. She sat across from me in my living room and asked me to walk through every detail of the past month, looking for anything unusual or out of place. I described my routine: work, home, helping Oliver with homework, weekend yard work, nothing remarkable. Then Rebecca asked, "Has anyone shown unusual interest in your family? Anyone who seemed overly friendly or asked too many questions?" I started to say no, but then remembered something. There's a guy at Oliver's soccer games. He's always there watching, but I've never seen him with any of the kids. I assumed he was someone's grandfather or something. Rebecca leaned forward. "Do you know his name?" I shook my head. "He just sits in the bleachers, kind of keeps to himself." She made a note. "We need to find out who he is. Also, I want you to think about anyone who might have a reason to target you specifically." The question opened a door I hadn't considered. Why me? If someone was framing me, there had to be a reason. I wasn't wealthy. I didn't have enemies. I lived a quiet life in a quiet suburb. "There was a guy at work who got fired about 6 months ago," I said slowly, memory surfacing. "Derek Lansing. He blamed me for reporting some irregularities I'd found in his expense accounts." Rebecca's eyes sharpened. "Did he threaten you?" I tried to remember the exact conversation. "He said I'd regret ruining his career, but it wasn't like a specific threat, just angry words during his exit interview that HR made him do." She wrote down his name. "We'll look into him. Anyone else?" I thought harder, going back further. Natalie had a former boyfriend who didn't take the breakup well. This was years ago before we got married. He showed up at our wedding making a scene. But that was almost 9 years ago. Rebecca wrote that down too. "What's his name?" The memory was hazy. "Something Carter. James Carter, I think." David and Rebecca left after midnight, promising to investigate both men and anyone else who might have motive to destroy my life. I tried to sleep, but kept thinking about the man at Oliver's soccer games, the way he always sat alone, the way he watched but never cheered. Something about him had always felt off, but I'd dismissed it as none of my business. Now I wondered if I'd seen a predator and done nothing. Tuesday morning brought news that made my blood run cold. The police had excavated all 6 burial sites in the woods behind the school. They'd found remains at 4 of them, but not Ashley Simmons. Instead, they'd found 4 different children, all buried within the past 18 months, all between the ages of 8 and 12. None of them had been reported missing because they were from different states, different circumstances, runaways, foster kids, children who'd slipped through cracks in various systems. The FBI was now involved because this was clearly a serial killer operating across state lines. Detective Paulson called me directly, and for the first time her voice carried something other than suspicion. "Mr. Brennan, we need your help. Someone is setting you up, and that same person is responsible for killing at least 4 children. We need to find them before Ashley Simmons becomes victim number 5. I sat down hard on the couch, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. "What do you need from me?" She outlined a plan. They wanted to set up surveillance on my house and on Oliver's school. They wanted me to maintain my normal routine as much as possible to see if anyone was watching me or following me. They wanted access to all my communication records going back a year to look for patterns or connections I might have missed. I agreed to all of it immediately. This was no longer about clearing my name. A child killer was out there using me as cover, and Ashley Simmons was running out of time. Rebecca called an hour later with information about Derek Lansing. He'd moved to Florida after being fired and had a solid alibi for the time period when the children were buried. Security footage from his apartment complex showed him coming and going regularly, and his new job had attendance records proving he'd been at work in Tampa during the relevant dates. James Carter was harder to track down, but Rebecca had found him living in Oregon working as a truck driver. His route logs put him on the West Coast for the entire past year. Neither man was the killer. That meant we were back to square one, looking for someone with access to my tools and a reason to frame me. The FBI sent 2 agents to interview me, and their questions focused less on my guilt and more on victimology and opportunity. They wanted to know about everyone who'd been near my house in the past year. Delivery drivers, repair people, neighbors, friends. The list felt endless. Everyone who might have had a chance to take my shovel from the unlocked garage. Wednesday afternoon, Oliver's soccer coach called me. His name was Daniel Wright, and he'd been coaching the team for 3 years. "Mr. Brennan, I heard about what's happening. I just wanted you to know that guy you mentioned, the one who watches the games. His name is Peter Vaughn. He told me he's a volunteer with youth services." Something in Coach Wright's tone suggested he didn't quite believe Peter's explanation. Did he give you any credentials? I asked. There was a pause. No, actually, he just started showing up about a year ago. Said he liked watching kids play sports because it reminded him of his own childhood. I thanked Coach Wright and immediately called Rebecca with the name. She ran it through databases while I stayed on the line. When she came back, her voice was tight. Peter Vaughn, 43 years old, registered sex offender, did time in Michigan for inappropriate contact with a minor. He's supposed to check in with his parole officer monthly, but he missed his last 2 appointments. The FBI moved fast once they had Peter Vaughn's name. They found his last known address, an apartment 3 miles from Riverside Elementary, but he'd moved out 2 weeks ago without leaving a forwarding address. His landlord said he'd been quiet and paid rent on time, but had asked strange questions about the school district and which elementary schools had wooded areas nearby. They ran his credit cards and found purchases at a hardware store that included shovels, tarps, and lime. One purchase had been made the day after I'd bought my red-handled shovel, and the security footage from the store showed him buying an identical shovel. The pattern became horrifyingly clear. Peter Vaughn had been stalking my family, learning our routines, and carefully constructing a frame that would point directly at me while he continued his killing. By Thursday, Ashley Simmons had been missing for 8 days. The FBI held a press conference, asking for any information about Peter Vaughn's whereabouts, showing his photo and warning the public he was extremely dangerous. I watched the press conference from my living room while FBI agents monitored activity around my house. Special Agent Reeves, who'd been assigned to coordinate with me, explained that Vaughn had likely targeted me because I fit a useful profile, married father with a child at the same school where he'd been watching potential victims, predictable routines, and an unlocked garage that made stealing the shovel trivially easy. He probably watched you for weeks before taking the shovel, Reeves said, learning when you were home, when you were at work, when your wife and son were out. Then he took the shovel, used it for his purposes, and left it where it would be found with your prints all over it. The sophistication of the plan was chilling. Vaughn hadn't just killed children. He'd carefully orchestrated a frame that would focus all suspicion on an innocent person while he continued hunting. That evening, a tip came in from a motel manager 30 miles away who recognized Vaughn's photo from the press conference. The FBI descended on the motel with tactical teams, but Vaughn's room was empty. He'd checked out that morning, just hours before the press conference aired. They found evidence he'd been watching news coverage of Ashley's disappearance obsessively. Newspaper clippings papered one wall. A laptop contained bookmarked articles about the investigation. And most disturbing, there were printed photos of children from Riverside Elementary, including one of Oliver playing soccer. Agent Reeves showed me the photo of my son and watched my reaction carefully. He was planning to take Oliver next, probably to make the frame even more convincing. Father kills his own son to cover up previous murders. The thought made me physically ill. I ran to the bathroom and vomited while Reeves waited. When I came back, she was on the phone coordinating protection for Oliver and Natalie at her mother's house. No one was taking any chances now. Friday morning brought the break everyone had been desperately hoping for. A woman called the FBI tip line saying she'd seen a man matching Vaughn's description at a storage facility on the east side of town. He'd been loading items into a unit he rented under a different name. The FBI got a warrant and cut the lock on the storage unit within an hour. Inside, they found a nightmare catalog of evidence: children's clothing, personal items from all 4 victims they'd found in the woods, and planning documents for future abductions. They also found a duffel bag containing duct tape, zip ties, and sedatives. But Peter Vaughn himself was nowhere to be found. Agent Reeves called me with an update that was both encouraging and terrifying. We know where he's been, we know what he's been doing, but we don't know where he is right now, and we still don't have Ashley Simmons. The storage unit had been rented for 14 months, meaning Vaughn had been planning this operation for over a year. The FBI released more information to the media, hoping public pressure would flush Vaughn out of hiding. News outlets ran stories about the frame job, about how an innocent father had nearly been destroyed while a serial killer operated freely. My name was cleared publicly, but the damage had already been done. I'd received death threats. My home had been vandalized. My family had left me, and somewhere, Peter Vaughn was watching it all unfold like entertainment. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I went through old photos on my phone looking for any image that might have accidentally captured Vaughn in the background. It was a long shot, but I needed to do something other than sit and wait. I found one from a soccer game 3 months ago, where the bleachers were visible in the background. I zoomed in and saw him there, sitting alone in his usual spot, and this time I noticed he was holding a phone pointed at the field, pointed directly at Oliver. I sent the photo to Agent Reeves immediately. She called back within minutes. We're going to need the original file with metadata intact. The phone's GPS data might tell us where Vaughn was going after the games. I emailed the original photo file and then kept searching through my camera roll. I found 2 more images with Vaughn in the background, both from different games weeks apart. In each one, he was holding his phone like he was recording. The FBI's tech team analyzed the metadata and confirmed the photos were taken at the soccer field. But more importantly, they found something in the background of one image that I hadn't noticed. A vehicle parked in the lot that matched the description of a van registered to Peter Vaughn. They ran the plate and got a hit from a traffic camera across town captured just yesterday. The van had been spotted near an industrial park that was mostly abandoned on weekends. Saturday morning, the FBI organized a search of the industrial park, with local police providing support. I wasn't allowed anywhere near the operation, but Agent Reeves kept me updated via phone. They found the van parked behind an old warehouse. It was empty, but contained more evidence of Vaughn's activities. Maps of the area around Riverside Elementary, marked with routes and times, photos of multiple children, including Oliver, and a journal detailing his surveillance of my family. The journal entries were disturbing in their detail. Vaughn had documented my work schedule down to the minute. He'd noted when Natalie went grocery shopping and which store she preferred. He'd tracked Oliver's activities, including soccer practice, playdates, and after-school routine. He'd been living in our periphery for months, learning everything about us, and we'd never noticed. The last entry in the journal was dated 2 days ago, and simply read, "Time to finish this and disappear." The warehouse itself was locked, but thermal imaging showed a heat signature in the basement level. The tactical team breached the entrance and went in with weapons drawn. I listened to Agent Reeves relay information in real time, her voice tense but controlled. "They've cleared the first floor, moving to basement access now." Silence stretched for 90 seconds that felt like hours. Then her voice came back with an edge of relief. "They found Ashley Simmons. She's alive." The words didn't feel real at first. After 11 days missing, after finding 4 dead children in the woods, the fact that Ashley was alive seemed impossible. "Is she okay?" I asked, knowing the answer was complicated. Agent Reeves paused. "She's conscious, dehydrated and scared, but physically intact. Vaughn kept her in a locked room in the basement. She's being transported to the hospital now." I felt tears running down my face for the first time since this nightmare started. But Peter Vaughn hadn't been in the warehouse. He'd left Ashley alive, which suggested either he'd been interrupted in his plan or he was baiting a trap. The FBI processed the warehouse for evidence while keeping heavy security around the scene in case Vaughn returned. I drove to the hospital where Ashley had been taken, not because I had any right to be there, but because I needed to see proof that this part of the story had a survivor. Agent Reeves met me in the parking lot. "The family doesn't want to see you. They know you're innocent, but you're still connected to their trauma." I understood completely. My presence would only remind them of the terror they'd experienced. I just needed to know Ashley would be okay. "She's talking to investigators now," Reeves said, giving details about Vaughn and what he told her. "She's a brave kid." I drove home feeling hollowed out. The good news about Ashley was overshadowed by the fact that Vaughn was still out there, still free. Sunday afternoon, Peter Vaughn walked into a police station 2 counties away and turned himself in. The officer at the desk later said Vaughn was calm and polite, explaining that he'd seen the news coverage and knew he couldn't run anymore. He asked for a lawyer and refused to say anything else. The FBI brought him to a federal facility for processing, and Agent Reeves called to tell me it was over. "We've got him. He can't hurt anyone else." But it didn't feel over. My life was still in ruins. My family was still gone. My reputation was still destroyed despite the public clearing of my name. I asked Reeves the question that had been eating at me since that first phone call from Mrs. Delacroix. Why me? Out of everyone in that neighborhood, everyone at that school, why did he choose my family to frame? She was quiet for a moment. We asked him that during initial questioning before his lawyer shut it down. He said you reminded him of his stepfather. Same build, same hair color. He wanted to destroy someone who looked like the man who'd abused him as a child. The psychological profile made a twisted kind of sense. Vaughn's crimes weren't just about killing children. They were about revenge against a parental figure he'd reconstructed in his mind, using me as a template. I'd been collateral damage in someone else's broken psychology, and that randomness was somehow worse than if there had been a rational reason. David called Monday with news about the internet harassment I'd endured. Several of the people who'd posted death threats or my address online were being charged with various crimes. The man who'd thrown the brick through my window had been identified through security footage and arrested. It was small justice, but it felt hollow. Tuesday afternoon, Natalie called for the first time since she'd left. I saw the news. "I'm so sorry I doubted you." Her voice was thick with tears. "I should have trusted you more." I wanted to be angry at her for leaving, for taking Oliver away when I'd needed them most. But I couldn't find the anger anywhere inside me. "You protected our son. That's what you were supposed to do." We talked for an hour about everything that had happened, about the evidence against Vaughn, about Ashley Simmons surviving. Finally, she asked, "Can we come home?" The question hung in the air. Could we rebuild after this? Could Oliver ever feel safe again, knowing a predator had been watching him for months? Could our marriage survive the strain of Natalie doubting me, even briefly? "I want you to come home," I said. "But I don't know if home exists anymore." She understood what I meant. The house was just a building now. The neighborhood was full of people who'd thought I was a killer. The school where Oliver went was where Vaughn had hunted his victims. Everything familiar had been poisoned. We agreed to talk more later and hung up without making any concrete plans. That night, I walked through the empty house room by room, looking at the space we'd built our lives in and seeing only crime scene photos and evidence bags. Peter Vaughn's trial was scheduled for 6 months later. But he surprised everyone by pleading guilty to all charges in exchange for life imprisonment without parole in a federal facility. The prosecutors agreed because it spared Ashley Simmons from having to testify in detail about her captivity. The families of the 4 children found in the woods got closure without having to relive their losses in a courtroom, and I didn't have to sit through weeks of testimony rehashing how thoroughly Vaughn had studied my life to frame me. The sentencing hearing was brief. Vaughn stood in his orange jumpsuit and listened to the judge describe his crimes in clinical detail. When asked if he had anything to say, he looked directly at me where I sat in the gallery and said 5 words. "I'm sorry you looked familiar." Then he was led away to spend the rest of his life in a cage. Ashley Simmons' family released a statement thanking law enforcement and acknowledging that I'd been a victim of Vaughn's manipulation. It didn't undo the damage, but it helped. Natalie and Oliver moved back home 3 weeks after Vaughn's sentencing. The first night felt awkward and strange, like we were strangers learning to inhabit the same space. Oliver had nightmares about the man who'd been watching him at soccer games. Natalie jumped at every unexpected noise. I found myself checking locks obsessively and looking over my shoulder constantly. We started family therapy with a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery. The sessions were painful and necessary, forcing us to talk about how we'd failed each other during the crisis. Natalie admitted she'd let fear override trust. I admitted I'd been so focused on proving my innocence that I hadn't considered how terrifying the situation was for them. Oliver drew pictures of monsters in his sessions, giving form to the formless dread that had invaded his childhood. Slowly, incrementally, we began to rebuild something that resembled normal life. 6 months later, we sold the house and moved to a different school district in a different town where nobody knew our story. Oliver joined a new soccer team where no predators watched from the bleachers, just normal parents cheering for their kids. Natalie found a new job that didn't require explaining why she'd suddenly needed extended time off the previous year. I transferred to a different branch of the accounting firm where colleagues didn't remember the news stories about me. We built a new normal on top of the ruins of our old life, and most days it almost felt real. The anniversary of Mrs. Delacroix's phone call came and went without ceremony. We didn't talk about it, but I know we all remembered. I thought about calling her to say thank you for finding those burial sites before more children died, but I didn't. Some connections are better left severed. Ashley Simmons did an interview for a news program about surviving abduction. She was 13 now, older than her years, speaking with careful precision about the importance of fighting back and never giving up hope. I watched the interview and saw glimpses of the little girl she'd been beneath the armored exterior she'd built. We all carried scars from Peter Vaughn's crimes, some visible, most not. The families of the 4 children found in the woods created a foundation dedicated to improving the systems that had failed to protect their kids. I donated to it anonymously because I couldn't bring myself to have my name associated with anything related to those deaths, even in support. Derek Lansing sent me a Facebook message, apologizing for the angry words when he'd been fired and saying he was glad I'd been cleared. I didn't respond. James Carter never reached out, and I was grateful for his continued absence. The neighborhood we'd left behind slowly forgot about us, moving on to new dramas and scandals. Mrs. Chen stopped texting about us in the group chat. New families moved into our old house, unaware of its history. Life continued with relentless momentum, indifferent to how thoroughly it had been disrupted. Some nights I still dream about that first phone call, Mrs. Delacroix's voice asking about a red-handled shovel. In the dreams I give different answers or hang up or somehow prevent the cascade of destruction that followed. But I always wake up to the same reality. We survived something that tried to destroy us, and survival doesn't come with satisfaction. Just the quiet knowledge that we're still here, still trying, still rebuilding one day at a time. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.